scream tore through the Texas morning like a rifle shot. Sachiko Yamamoto, the woman who had mocked American doctors for 3 straight days, hit the dust face first. Blood spotted her lips. Her legs spasmed, jerking like a puppet with cut strings. The cowboy in the stethoscope, the one she had called a farm boy playing surgeon, ran toward her. His boots kicked up red dust. His hat flew off. His hands, those rough rancher's hands she had ridiculed, reached for her with a gentleness that made no sense. 36 hours later, that same cowboy would save her life with nothing but steady hands and a scalpel. But first she would have to stop laughing. And the laughter, when it died, would take something else with it. Something none of them expected to lose. Their certainty. December 1944. West Texas. The truck rumbled to a stop in a cloud of dust that turned the afternoon sun into a bloody smear across the horizon. 15 Japanese women prisoners of war stepped down onto American soil for the first time. Their boots thin-soled and worn through touched ground that made no sense. They had been told Americans were barbarians, that prisoner of war camps were death traps, that Western medicine was crude butchery wrapped in white coats and lies. Instead, they found barbed wire surrounding a working ranch, guards with rifles who tipped their hats and said ma'am like they were greeting dinner guests, and a doctor who looked like he should be roping cattle, not treating patients. The contradictions piled up like stones. Clean water in basins when there should have been filth. Instruments that gleamed when there should have been rust. Beds with actual mattresses when there should have been bare boards and lice. Keiko Nakamura stood in the back of the group counting the inconsistencies like prayer beads. 20 years old, and she had already learned that kindness was usually a prelude to cruelty. The Japanese officers who smiled before punishment. The nurses who spoke softly before the needle went in wrong, too fast, too hard. This, she thought, was the same trap wearing different clothes. The cowboy doctor stood on the porch of what looked like a barn. His stethoscope hung around his neck like a costume piece from a play nobody had rehearsed. Dust caked his boots. Sweat darkened his collar. His hat cast a shadow across a face too young to have seen what his eyes said he had seen. Sachiko whispered something in Japanese, her voice sharp with defensive humor. The kind of joke you make when the world stops matching your expectations and fear starts filling the gaps. Look at him. Bet he checks blood pressure with a lasso. The others giggled, nervous laughter, the sound of women trying to make sense of a reality that refused to cooperate with their training. Because they had been trained, months of lectures about American savagery, about prison camps where prisoners were beaten, starved, worked to death, about Western medicine that treated human bodies like machinery, cold and mechanical and cruel. But the man on the porch did not look cruel. He looked tired, and something about that exhaustion felt more dangerous than violence ever could. Keiko's stomach twisted. She had spent 3 years learning to recognize threats. The tightness in a superior's jaw before he struck. The way a doctor's hands moved when he stopped caring whether the patient lived or died. The particular silence that meant someone was about to scream. None of those signs were here, and their absence terrified her more than their presence ever had. Keiko Nakamura was 20 years old and had already forgotten how to cry. The Nagoya Field Hospital had taught her that. The smell came back to her now, standing in Texas dust under a sun that felt nothing like home. Lie and death, copper and rot. The particular sweetness of infection left too long. She had been 17 when they handed her a bucket and called her tentai. Nursing assistant, a noble word for scraping blood off bedpans, for folding sheets stiff with fever sweat, for lying to dying boys about going home. The hospital was a cement box with tar paper windows and a roof that leaked when it rained, which was often. The water pooled in corners and mixed with whatever else pooled there. Blood, bile, things Keiko learned not to name. Supplies were rationed tighter than rice. Gauze was reused until it fell apart. Syringes were shared between patients because there were never enough, and sterilization took time they did not have. The most common tool was not a scalpel. It was a prayer. The patients, many just a few years older than Keiko, sometimes cried for their mothers. More often, they just asked the same question over and over, their voices getting smaller each time. Will I go home? Keiko lied to all of them. She had to, because the truth that most of them would die in that cement box under that leaking roof, that their bodies would be wrapped in whatever cloth could be spared, and their families would receive letters months later, if at all. That truth served no purpose except to add psychological suffering to physical agony. So she lied, and she got good at it. She had once held the hand of a boy with half his ribs blown out. Shrapnel from an American bomb, they said, though she never knew for sure. His lungs filled with blood faster than they could drain it. His breathing sounded like drowning because that was what it was. "You will be fine," she whispered, her face close to his so he could hear over the sound of his own death. "You will go home. You will see your mother again." He believed her. She saw it in his eyes. The relief, the hope. Then he drowned. She wiped his face with a cloth that had been used on 3 other patients that day. She folded the blanket over his chest, tucking the edges in with the care her own mother had used when Keiko was small and afraid of thunder. Then she moved to the next cot. The officers told her she was strong. She was not strong. She was numb. And numbness, she learned, was not the same as strength, but it looked similar enough that people could not tell the difference. They taught her other things too. Lessons wrapped in certainty and delivered with the force of gospel truth. Western medicine was crude. American doctors were butchers in white coats who used drugs to hide pain instead of conquering it. "Their bodies are stronger," one instructor said, "but their souls are weak. They do not understand suffering the way we do. They cannot." The lectures made sense at the time. They had to make sense because the alternative, that Japanese medicine was simply under-resourced and overwhelmed, that suffering was not noble but wasteful, that pain conquered nothing except the will to endure it, those thoughts were dangerous. Keiko believed what she was told, or at least she wanted to believe it. Belief was easier than doubt. Doubt asked questions that had no good answers. Now, standing in Texas with the sun hammering down on her shoulders and dust coating her throat, she touched the calluses on her hands. Lie burns. Proof of what she had survived. Proof of what she had become. An American medic approached, tall and freckled, awkward as a newborn colt. He wore a Red Cross armband that looked too clean to be real. His grin was shy, almost apologetic. "Ma'am," he said, gesturing toward the barn-turned infirmary. Keiko blinked. No one had called her ma'am in 3 years. Prisoners were not ma'am. Prisoners were numbers. Prisoners were problems to be managed. Prisoners were at best labor, at worst evidence of failure. But this boy, this enemy, said "ma'am" like he meant it. This is the trap, Keiko thought. Kindness before cruelty. Make us trust, then break us harder. I have seen this before. But even as the thought formed, doubt crept in around its edges. Because Japanese officers who smiled before punishment smiled differently. Their kindness had teeth. It waited. This boy's kindness did not wait. It simply was. And that scared her more than violence ever could. Before we continue Keiko's story, I want to hear from you. Many of you watching this lived through this era. Your fathers and grandfathers served during World War II. Some of you may have served yourselves. If you or your family had any experience with prisoners of war, German, Italian, or Japanese during or after the war, please share your story in the comments below. These memories matter. They are part of the greatest generation's legacy that deserves to be preserved. And if this story is beginning to resonate with you, if you can already feel where this is going, please hit that like button. It helps us bring more untold stories like this to light. Now back to Texas, December 1944, where 15 Japanese women were about to learn that everything they believed about America was built on sand. The facility was not like the propaganda posters. No cages made from barbed wire and desperation. No torture instruments displayed to break the spirit before the body. Just a working Texas ranch with a few extra buildings and more fencing than seemed necessary. Chickens clucked near the fence line, pecking at insects in the late afternoon sun. Horses grazed in paddocks that stretched toward hills the color of old brick. Somewhere close, bacon sizzled in a mess hall. The smell drifted across the compound like a promise or a threat, depending on how you chose to interpret it. Keiko's stomach clenched. Real bacon. Not the thin strips rationed out before the war, back when Japan still had things like bacon to ration. Not the memory of meat. Actual bacon, thick cut and abundant, the smell so rich it made her mouth water, and her chest tighten with something she could not name. Propaganda. Sachiko hissed beside her. They will feed us like pigs before slaughter. Make us fat for the knife. The other women murmured agreement, but their eyes betrayed them. Hungry eyes, desperate eyes, eyes that had not seen abundance in so long that even the enemy's plenty looked like salvation. A woman appeared in the doorway of the mess hall, not a prisoner, an American. She wore an apron and her hair in a style Keiko recognized from old magazines, the kind they used to burn for warmth in the Nagoya hospital during the coldest months. The woman waved, just waved, like they were neighbors, like this was normal. Keiko felt her certainty slip another notch. Sergeant Hana Tanaka stood at perfect military attention, her posture so rigid it looked painful. At 35, she was the highest-ranking Japanese officer among the prisoners. Burn scars covered her hands, souvenirs from the incendiary raids that had killed her entire unit. She never spoke about it, but the scars did the speaking for her. Her voice cut through the afternoon like a blade through silk. Listen carefully. The enemy will try to break you with kindness, not cruelty. This medical care they promise, this food they offer, this clean water and soft beds, these are weapons. Psychological weapons designed to make you forget who you are and what they have done to our empire. She paused, letting the words settle. Do not volunteer to help them. Do not cooperate beyond what orders require. Do not speak to them except when direct questions demand answers. These are not doctors. They are conquerors in white coats, and their gentleness is a lie wrapped in strategy. Her eyes found Keiko in the group, especially you, Nakamura. I have seen how you watch them. Curiosity is the first step toward betrayal. Do not take that step. The warning hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. Heavy, lingering, impossible to ignore. Keiko wanted to argue, wanted to say that observation was not betrayal, that trying to understand the enemy was tactical intelligence, that curiosity was survival instinct dressed in different clothes. But she said nothing. Because Tanaka was right about one thing, Keiko was curious. And curiosity in wartime was dangerous. What happens to those who ask questions? The thought formed before she could stop it. What happens to those who wonder if the enemy might be something other than what we were told? She did not want to find out, but she suspected she would anyway. The infirmary sat at the edge of the ranch, a converted barn with fresh whitewash and a red cross painted on the door. The cross was large enough to see from a distance, bright enough to stand out against the pale wood. A symbol, a promise, a declaration. We heal here. Keiko did not trust symbols. Symbols were easy. Reality was harder. Inside the barn had been transformed into something that looked like it belonged in a teaching hospital, not a prisoner of war camp in the middle of nowhere, Texas. Rows of cots lined the walls, each with clean linens tucked in with corners so precise they could have been measured with a ruler. Shelves stocked with bandages, rolls of gauze wound tight and stacked by size. A gleaming steel tray of instruments laid out like surgical tools in a medical textbook. A basin of steaming water sat on a table, the actual steam rising from actual hot water, not the lukewarm dregs they had used in Nagoya. Keiko's breath caught. In the Nagoya hospital, they had one pair of scissors. One. Shared between 30 patients and never rinsed between uses because there was no time and water was for drinking, not cleaning. Infections spread from patient to patient like rumors unstoppable and deadly. Here there were dozens of instruments. Each one had its own designated space on the shelves. Each one gleamed under the light from windows that had real glass, not tar paper. An entire cabinet taller than Keiko and twice as wide was dedicated to sterilization. She could see the autoclave inside the metal chamber where instruments were boiled under pressure to kill every living thing that might cause infection. They have more equipment in this barn, she thought, than we had in the entire Nagoya Field Hospital. The realization hit like a physical blow. Dr. Jackson Bennett stood waiting near the examination table. He had removed his hat, revealing hair the color of sun-dried wheat. Sweat darkened his collar despite the cool December air. His hands, when he gestured toward the cots, moved with the careful precision of someone used to handling fragile things. "Welcome, ladies," he said. The words were translated by the young Nisei medic, Tommy Rodriguez, whose Japanese was clumsy but earnest. "We are going to do a quick health check. Nothing invasive, just want to make sure everyone is okay." The women looked at each other, uncertain, afraid. Keiko stepped forward. Not because she was brave. She was not brave. But someone had to go first, and waiting only made fear grow larger. Jackson Bennett wrapped the cuff around Keiko's arm with movements so gentle she almost flinched. Almost. Because flinching would show weakness, and weakness was dangerous, and she had learned long ago to hide anything that might be used against her. She waited for the pain, the rough squeeze, the impatient handling she had learned to expect from medical procedures in wartime. It never came. The pressure built slowly, evenly measured. His fingers did not linger. His eyes did not leer. He simply took her blood pressure like it mattered, like she was a patient, not a prisoner, like her body deserved the same care he would give to anyone else. When he was done, he smiled, not triumphant, not mocking, just kind. Good, Tommy translated. Blood pressure normal. You are doing fine. Keiko stared at the cuff mark on her arm, a faint red ring that would fade in minutes. No bruise, no pain, just the ghost of pressure already disappearing. In Nagoya, blood pressure checks were violent affairs. Grab the arm, pump the bulb too fast, read the numbers while already moving to the next patient because there were always more patients and never enough time. If the cuff left bruises, that was unfortunate, but unavoidable. Efficiency mattered more than comfort. This was different. This was professional, careful. Like Keiko was a patient who deserved time and attention, not a problem to be processed. I was a patient, she thought, the realization strange and uncomfortable. Not a prisoner, not for those 2 minutes. A patient. She hated that it confused her more than cruelty would have. The other women watched from the sides of the room, their faces carefully blank. But their posture betrayed them. Shoulders that had been rigid with tension now slumped slightly. Eyes that had been hard with suspicion now darted toward Jackson's every movement, cataloging each unexpected kindness. They whispered behind his back, their voices low enough that the Americans could not hear. He looks like he should be milking cows, not treating wounds. Maybe he will use whiskey as antiseptic, like in the cowboy films. What if he has never even seen a real hospital? But the words came slower now. Less edge, more wonder. The jokes, once sharp as bayonets, began to dull. Because hidden under all the scoffing was a reality none of them wanted to admit. They were tired, not just from the journey or the hunger, but from the weight of certainty. Certainty that the world was one way, that Americans were savages, that surrender meant annihilation. But these men, awkward and sunburned and earnest, did not fit into that script. And when the checkups ended, when the doctors stepped back and offered them water blankets, even a moment to rest, the women did not know whether to laugh again or listen. That evening, Keiko lay on a cot that did not smell like mildew, under a blanket that did not scratch, in a room where no one screamed. The silence was almost worse than noise. In Nagoya, the nights were full of sounds, groaning, crying, the wet rattle of lungs filling with fluid, the desperate prayers of boys who knew they were dying but could not quite believe it yet. Here there was only the soft rustle of wind through cracks in the barn walls, the distant sound of horses in their paddocks, the low murmur of American voices from the guard station. No screaming, no dying, just quiet. Keiko should have felt relief. Sleep should have come easily after months of exhaustion. Instead, she felt something far more dangerous. Hope. And hope in wartime was the cruelest weapon of all, because hope required belief in a future that might not exist. Hope demanded faith in things like mercy and fairness, in the possibility that tomorrow might be better than today. Keiko had given up hope in the Nagoya hospital. Given it up the night she held the boy with the blown-out ribs and whispered lies about him going home. Hope died when he did drown in his own blood, while she watched and could do nothing. But here in this quiet barn with clean sheets and the smell of lavender soap, hope stirred again, small and fragile like the first green shoot after winter. She did not want it, did not trust it, but it grew anyway whether she wanted it or not. Tomorrow they would eat breakfast. Real breakfast if the smell of bacon was any indication. Tomorrow they would learn more about this place that made no sense. Tomorrow they would discover whether the kindness was real or just another form of cruelty waiting to reveal itself. Tomorrow, Keiko thought everything might change. She had no idea how right she was. Morning came with the smell of bacon. Not memory, not imagination. Real bacon, thick cut and sizzling, the sound of fat popping in cast iron skillets, drifting across the compound like an invitation nobody knew how to accept. Keiko woke to it. The smell invaded her dreams, first turning them strange and hungry. Then consciousness returned, and with it the realization that this was not a dream. Somewhere close, someone was cooking more bacon than she had seen in 3 years. The women gathered in the barracks doorway, drawn by a smell that triggered memories from before the war, before rationing, before hunger became the baseline state of existence. "It is poison," Sachiko said, her voice flat with certainty that sounded more like hope than belief. "Or drugged," another woman added. "Make us compliant, easier to control." Keiko said nothing, but her mouth watered anyway. The mess hall was larger than it had looked from outside. Long tables arranged in rows, windows that let in the early morning sun, and at the far end a serving line where American soldiers filled metal trays with food. Not prison food, not the watery rice gruel or thin soup that defined meals in every military facility Keiko had ever seen. This was breakfast, real breakfast. The kind people ate when food was abundant and tomorrow was certain. Bacon, thick strips 6 or 7 per plate glistening with rendered fat. Scrambled eggs bright yellow and steaming. Toast, real toast from real bread with real butter melting into the porous surface. Coffee that smelled like it might actually taste like coffee instead of roasted barley or whatever substitutes desperation created. The women stood frozen at the entrance. Dr. Bennett walked to the serving line, filled his own plate with the same food and sat at a table in full view of the prisoners. He cut his bacon-forked eggs into his mouth, chewed, swallowed. Nothing theatrical, just eating. Tommy Rodriguez appeared beside the group, his shy grin firmly in place. "Same food," he said in his clumsy Japanese. "No different. Please, eat." One by one, the women moved forward. Not because they trusted Bit, because hunger was a more powerful force than suspicion, and their bodies had been running on empty for too long to resist. Keiko picked up a tray. The metal was warm from washing. Clean. Actually clean, not the sticky residue of inadequate rinsing that characterized every mess hall she had known. The soldier behind the serving line, a man with gray hair and kind eyes, spooned eggs onto her tray. Added bacon, toast, a cup of coffee. He did not smile exactly, but his face held something close to it, something like welcome. She found a seat at the end of a table, alone. The bacon glistened on her tray, taunting her with abundance. The first bite was a betrayal, salty, rich. The fat melted on her tongue, crispy on the edges where it had caramelized in the pan tender in the middle where meat remembered being muscle. It tasted like abundance, like a country so wealthy it could afford to feed its enemies better than Japan fed its own soldiers. Keiko chewed slowly, tasting 3 years of hunger in every bite. Around her, other women experienced their own private betrayals. Sachiko's eyes welled with tears she refused to let fall. Another woman covered her face with her hands, ashamed of the pleasure that came from enemy food. A third ate mechanically, her jaw working with determination, as if speed might prevent taste from registering. This is how they win. Keiko thought the bacon heavy in her stomach. Not with bombs or bullets, with bacon and clean beds and doctors who say please. They make you forget you are supposed to hate them. Across the mess hall, Sergeant Tanaka sat with arms crossed. Her plate remained empty. Her face held an expression of such rigid disapproval that it looked painful to maintain. After breakfast, she cornered Keiko outside the barracks. "You looked grateful," Tanaka said quietly. Her voice held no anger, just something worse. Disappointment. "Be careful, Nakamura. Gratitude is the first step toward forgetting who killed your countrymen, who burned your cities, who made this war necessary." Keiko met her eyes. "I looked hungry," she replied. "Because I am." Tanaka's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. What could she say? That hunger was preferable to accepting enemy charity, that starvation built character, that they should refuse food on principle and die proud. The words would sound absurd spoken aloud. So Tanaka stayed silent, but her eyes promised consequences that neither of them could quite envision yet. Later that morning, Dr. Bennett invited volunteers to help in the infirmary. "Just restocking supplies," Tommy explained. "Folding bandages, no pressure, no requirements." Keiko's feet moved before her brain could intervene. She told herself it was tactical. Learning enemy medical procedures was intelligence gathering. Understanding their methods, their supplies, their vulnerabilities, all of this served Japan even in captivity. But that was a lie, and she knew. She volunteered because she was curious, because the infirmary represented something she had never seen before. Medicine practiced with resources instead of desperation. Healing that did not require constant triage and impossible choices. She volunteered because she wanted to understand how the enemy accomplished what Japan could not. Inside the barn smelled like antiseptic and hope. Tommy was already there attempting to organize a shelf of supplies with limited success. Bandages kept unrolling. Bottles tipped over. He had somehow managed to scatter cotton swabs across an entire table. He saw Keiko and his face brightened with relief. "Help," he said in English, then switched to awkward Japanese. "Please help. I am very bad at this." Despite everything, despite the weight of Tanaka's warning and the bacon sitting heavy in her stomach, and the certain knowledge that helping the enemy was exactly what she had been warned against, Keiko almost smiled. She reached for a roll of gauze, began refolding it with the precise hospital corners she had learned in Nagoya. Tommy watched like she was performing surgery instead of basic supply organization. The instruments occupied an entire wall of shelving. Keiko moved toward them, slowly drawn by a fascination she could not quite name. Scalpels arranged by size, smallest to largest, each blade gleaming under the light from windows that had been positioned to maximize illumination. Forceps without a spot of rust. Scissors with edges sharp enough to cut cleanly, not tear tissue. Hemostats, retractors, speculums. Every tool a surgeon might need organized with the kind of care that suggested they were valued, maintained, respected. In Nagoya, they had one pair of scissors for the entire surgical ward. One, dull from use and never sharpened because there was no one to sharpen them and no time to spare from the constant flow of wounded. Those scissors cut tissue like tearing cloth. They left ragged edges that healed poorly when they healed at all. Here there were dozens of surgical scissors, each pair dedicated to a specific purpose. Tissue scissors, suture scissors, bandage scissors, wire scissors for removing metal sutures. Keiko picked up a pair of forceps, turned them over in her hands. The metal was cool and smooth, perfectly balanced, light enough to manipulate with precision, heavy enough to feel substantial. She had spent 3 years working with instruments so degraded they barely functioned, had watched boys die from infections that spread through the greasy, unsterilized equipment, had learned to make do with inadequate tools because there were no adequate tools to be had. And now, standing in an enemy prison camp in the middle of Texas, she held a pair of forceps that were better than anything the Nagoya Field Hospital had ever possessed. Her vision blurred. Ma'am, Tommy's voice concerned and close. "You okay?" She set the forceps down carefully, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Yes," she said in English. The word felt strange in her mouth. Okay, but she was not okay. Because she had spent 3 years believing American medicine was primitive, that Japanese discipline and spirit compensated for material shortages, that suffering built character, and character won wars. But this barn, this converted ranch building in the middle of nowhere, had more medical resources than the entire Nagoya Field Hospital. And all the discipline in the world, all the character and spirit and willingness to suffer, none of it mattered against sepsis or gangrene or infections that could be prevented with sterilized instruments and clean water. The realization settled in her chest like swallowing stones. Tommy resumed his clumsy attempts at organization. Keiko worked beside him in silence, refolding bandages, restocking shelves, learning the geography of American medical abundance. At one point, their hands touched over a tin of iodine. Both froze. Tommy jerked back like he had grabbed something hot. Keiko did the same. "Sorry," he stammered in English, then Japanese. "Very sorry." "It is fine," she replied. They worked the rest of the hour, carefully maintaining distance, hyper-aware of every movement, every potential contact, as if touching might trigger something neither of them understood. When the work was done, Tommy walked Keiko to the door. He held it open, a gesture so automatic it seemed unconscious. "Thank you," he said. "You are very good at this. Better than me." "I had practice," Keiko said quietly. "In Japan?" "At hospital, yes. Must have been hard. The war." Keiko looked at him. Really looked. He was young, maybe 19, Japanese-American, second generation. His parents had probably come to America seeking opportunity, had probably worked hard, saved money, built lives. And then the war came, and their son wore an American uniform while their ancestral homeland burned. "Very hard," she agreed. "I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air between them, strange and fragile. An American soldier apologizing to a Japanese prisoner for the hardships of war. The absurdity should have made her laugh. Instead, it made her throat tight. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. 3 days passed, routine established itself the way routine does through repetition and the human need for predictability. Wake, breakfast, work detail or medical checkup, or simple waiting. Lunch, afternoon in the barracks, or for those brave enough to risk Tanaka's disapproval, helping in the infirmary. Dinner, sleep, normal, almost normal. If you could ignore the barbed wire and armed guards and the fact that they were prisoners in a foreign country, thousands of miles from home. Keiko felt the fever building on the third night, a tightness in her chest, a heaviness in her limbs, the particular sensation of heat beneath her skin that meant her body was fighting something. She ignored it, because showing weakness was dangerous, because sick prisoners were burdens, because in Nagoya sick nurses were replaced, not treated. Morning roll call, the sun already brutal despite the early hour. December in Texas felt nothing like December in Japan. Dry heat instead of damp cold, dust instead of rain. The sky tilted. Keiko tried to correct it, to force the world back into its proper orientation through sheer will. But will meant nothing to gravity or fever, or the way blood pressure dropped when infection spread. The ground rushed up. She had time to think that was strange, the ground moving when it should have been still, and then nothing. Consciousness returned in fragments. Rough hands but gentle. Lifting her. Voices urgent but careful. The word pulse measured and calm and American. A cot beneath her. Pine ceiling above. Fan turning in lazy circles, moving air that felt cool against her burning skin. An IV line in her arm. Panic surged. She grabbed for the needle fingers, clumsy and weak. "Easy," a voice said. Jackson Bennett's voice, recognizable now, even without translation. "Easy. You are very sick." Tommy's face appeared, his expression worried. "Fever," he translated. "Infection. We will help." Keiko braced for pain. In Nagoya 4, insertions were brutal, fast stabs with needles that had been used too many times and hurt going in and hurt staying in. Speed mattered more than comfort because there were always more patients and never enough time. But the needle was already in place. She had barely felt it. The shock of that, the gentleness, hit harder than pain ever could. Jackson checked her forehead with the back of his hand. His palm was rough from ranch work, but his touch was impossibly soft. He adjusted the IV drip with movements precise enough for watchmaking, checked her pulse, made notes on a chart. No impatience, no rough handling, no contempt for the enemy body that required his care. Just medicine, real medicine. The kind practiced when you had time and tools, in the belief that every life mattered. Keiko's throat tightened. Tears rose hot and unwelcome. She tried to stop them. Crying was weakness. Weakness was dangerous. She had learned in Nagoya to swallow tears the way she swallowed lies about boys going home. But the tears came anyway, because she was not crying from pain. She was crying because it did not hurt. 3 years of brutal medical care. 3 years of watching boys die from infections that could have been prevented. 3 years of believing that American medicine was primitive and crude. And now, with an IV line feeding antibiotics into her bloodstream and a fan turning overhead and clean sheets beneath her body, now she understood. The lie had not been American. The lie had been hers. Theirs. Japan's. The propaganda that said suffering built character and discipline conquered disease, and spirit mattered more than resources. Spirit meant nothing to sepsis. Discipline did not sterilize instruments. Character could not compensate for the absence of antibiotics. She had believed the lie because believing was easier than accepting that her country, her beloved Japan, simply did not have what this converted barn in Texas possessed in abundance: equipment, training, time, the luxury of treating patients like they deserved to live instead of constantly triaging who might survive and who was already lost. Jackson pulled a blanket over her legs, adjusted her pillow, spoke quietly to Dr. Hayes, who nodded and made his own notes. "Rest now," Tommy translated. "You are safe. Safe." Keiko turned the word over in her mind, examining it from all angles. When had she last felt safe? Before the war, before Nagoya? Before she learned that bodies broke in ways spirit could not mend, she let her eyes close. Not from fear, not from pain, from exhaustion, from the relief of being a patient instead of a prisoner, from the strange, terrifying comfort of enemy hands that healed instead of hurt. Outside the barn, through cracks in the wall, she heard voices, Japanese voices, her fellow prisoners watching through gaps in the wood. Is she dying? Someone asked. No one answered, but they saw. They all saw. How the Americans moved, how they cleaned their tools, how they worked without guns or threats or violence. This was not the America they had been warned about. Week 3, the Red Cross made an announcement. Prisoners could write home. Letters would be censored, of course, examined for military intelligence or attempts at coded communication, but still a lifeline, a connection to the world beyond barbed wire. 15 women hunched over paper in the barracks, struggling with what to say. Some drew pictures, flowers, houses, the things they remembered from before. Others wrote careful lies, the kind that would pass censorship and preserve dignity. Food adequate, treatment acceptable. I am surviving. Keiko stared at blank paper. She wanted to write the truth, wanted to tell her mother that American cowboys had saved her life with medicine Japan could not provide, that the enemy had treated her with more care than her own country's hospitals had managed, that everything they had been told about American cruelty was wrong. But truth was dangerous. Writing those words would mark her as a collaborator, would put her family at risk, would ensure that when the war ended, if Japan won, she would face consequences she could not predict. So she chose different words, technical words, words that were true but hid as much as they revealed. Okasan, I am alive. The facility has adequate medical supplies. We are treated according to Geneva Convention standards. I think of you often, your daughter Keiko, each word precise, each sentence neutral, the kind of letter that would pass censorship because it said nothing that mattered. She sealed it, handed it to the guard collecting mail. Across the room, Sachiko scribbled furiously, her pen moving with the speed of anger. American kindness is propaganda, she wrote. Trust nothing. They feed us to weaken our resolve. I remain loyal to the emperor. I will return home with honor intact. But beneath the harsh words visible through the thin paper, Keiko saw crossed out lines, scratched out sentences that Sachiko had written and then rejected. They saved my life when they could have let me die. The words were still readable beneath the scribbles, still true beneath the denial. Sergeant Tanaka walked between the cots, reading over shoulders. Rewrite that, she told one woman. Do not mention the medical care. Say the food is terrible, she instructed another. She stopped at Keiko's sealed envelope. What did you write, Nakamura? The truth, that I am alive. Nothing more. What more is there to say? Tanaka's eyes narrowed, but she moved on. Because Keiko's letter was already sealed and forcing it open would reveal Tanaka's own paranoia. 2 letters would leave Texas that week, but only one would reach Tokyo, and the one that arrived would contain a truth that neither woman intended to tell. Evening. The infirmary quiet. Keiko returned to drop off clean linens, folded with the precise hospital corners she had perfected over weeks of practice. Jackson sat at the desk near the window holding something small. Keiko should have announced herself, should have made noise, but curiosity held her silent. In his hands, a photograph, black and white edges worn from handling. 2 boys by a creek fishing poles in hand. The older one, maybe 10, had his arm around a younger boy who could not have been more than 8. Both grinning, gap-toothed and sunburned, the particular joy of summer afternoons when tomorrow seemed infinite. Jackson's face now held no joy. His jaw was tight, his eyes wet. He did not know she was watching. He pressed his thumb to the older boy's face in the photograph, a gesture so tender it made Keiko's chest ache. Sorry, Bobby, he whispered. I am trying so damn hard. Then he tucked the photo into his shirt pocket over his heart and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Keiko stepped back, her foot scraped wood. Jackson turned. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. She should have apologized, should have explained. But words felt inadequate against the raw grief she had just witnessed. Jackson cleared his throat, managed something like a smile. Keiko, he said, her name in his accent soft and careful. Did you need something? She held up the linens. Clean, she said in English. Thank you. Just put them on the shelf. She did. Worked slowly, hyper-aware of him, sitting 10 feet away, pretending to write reports while grief sat on his shoulders like a physical weight. Who was Bobby? The question burned in her throat. Why are you crying? Why does an American doctor carry grief for someone whose name sounds like a child's? But she asked nothing, because his grief was private, because she had no right to it, because enemies did not comfort each other's losses. She finished with the linens, turned to leave. Keiko Jackson said quietly. She stopped. Thank you for your help. You are very good at this. I had practice. I know. Tommy told me. About Nagoya. Pause. I am sorry you had to see what you saw. An American apologizing to her. For her suffering, for the things war had forced her to witness and do. The absurdity should have been laughable. Instead, it felt like the only honest thing anyone had said to her in months. Thank you, she whispered, and fled before the tears could start again. The next day, Keiko swept the infirmary porch. Not assigned work. She had volunteered. Tanaka's disapproval was a constant pressure now, but Keiko had stopped trying to avoid it. Two guards walked past, their voices carrying. Carter, the one who always looked at the prisoners with barely concealed hostility, was talking. Do not know why Doc treats these Japs like royalty. His brother Robert died at Bataan. Death march, starved by Japanese guards, beaten, worked until he dropped dead in the jungle. The other guard, quieter, replied, Jesus, and he is out here saving their women, yeah. Says Robert would not want him to hate. Says medicine does not have enemies. That is some saint-level forgiveness, man. Carter spat tobacco juice at the dirt. It is idiotic, is what it is. The broom fell from Keiko's hands. Robert, Bobby, the photograph, the fishing trip, the boy with his arm around his little brother. Bataan Death March. Thousands of American and Filipino prisoners forced to march 60 miles in tropical heat. No food, no water. Bayoneted if they fell, beaten if they slowed. Thousands dead. Jackson's brother, killed by Japanese soldiers. And Jackson was here in Texas healing Japanese prisoners, giving them antibiotics and clean sheets and gentleness they did not deserve. While the question was not rhetorical, it was desperate, urgent, a need to understand how someone carried that much grief and chose mercy anyway. She wanted to ask him, wanted to confront him with the knowledge and demand explanation. But the words stuck in her throat because asking meant admitting she had been spying, meant acknowledging that she cared enough about his motivation to question it, meant crossing a line she had not realized she was approaching until it was already behind her. That night, she lay in her cot and tried to reconcile the facts. Jackson Bennett had lost his brother to Japanese cruelty, had every reason to hate, to seek revenge, to treat Japanese prisoners with the same brutality Japan had shown American POWs. Instead, he gave her an IV that did not hurt. Clean sheets, careful medicine, time. The contradiction made no sense. Revenge made sense. Hate made sense. An eye for an eye, a death for a death. That was the logic of war, and it required no explanation. But mercy, forgiveness, choosing to heal the people whose countrymen killed your brother, that required something Keiko did not have a word for. Something bigger than duty. Something that transcended the simple mathematics of vengeance. She fell asleep with the question still burning and woke to Sergeant Tanaka calling an emergency meeting. All prisoners summoned. Mandatory. Keiko's stomach churned. Tanaka stood at attention, her posture rigid enough to hurt. Her voice cut through the barracks like a blade through flesh. I have observed collaboration. Women laughing with the enemy, volunteering to help them, using their tools and their techniques and their medicines without shame. Her eyes swept the room. Some of you act as if these Americans are friends. They are not. They have killed thousands of our civilians, burned our cities, firebombed Tokyo until the streets ran with melted glass and the canals filled with bodies. The words hit like artillery, reminder of what they all knew but had been trying not to think about. The war was still happening. Japan was still burning. While they ate bacon and slept on clean sheets, their countrymen died. And yet you smile at them, thank them, help them. Nakamura, stand. Keiko rose on legs that felt like water. You spend every day in that infirmary, learning their methods. using their equipment. Tell me, do you still remember who you serve? The question was a trap. Every answer led to condemnation. Truth would make her a traitor. Lies would make her a coward. Keiko chose something else, something that felt like truth but avoided the trap's teeth. I serve patience, she said quietly. I serve healing. I am a nurse. That has not changed. But what you learn comes from the enemy. Knowledge has no nationality. Sergeant, medicine is medicine. You sound like them, Tanaka hissed. Like Americans with their talk of universal values and shared humanity. We are not the same. We will never be the same. I did not say we were the same. I said medicine is medicine. A wound is a wound. Infection is infection. These things do not care about flags. The barracks held its breath. Tanaka stepped closer. When this war ends and the empire prevails, there will be a reckoning. Those who collaborated will answer for their choices. Then I will answer, Keiko said. But I will be alive to do it, thanks to them. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Half the women looked away ashamed or afraid or both. The other half met Keiko's eyes, nodded slightly. Agreement too dangerous to voice but real nonetheless. The prisoners were fracturing, splitting along fault lines of belief and experience, and the irreconcilable difference between what they had been taught and what they had witnessed. Tanaka turned to the rest of the group. Anyone else wish to defend collaboration? Silence. Then remember this. The enemy is clever. They use kindness like a weapon. Do not be fooled. When we return home, Japan will expect loyalty, not gratitude toward those who bombed our cities and killed our families. She dismissed them with a gesture. The women scattered. Keiko returned to her cot to find a package waiting. Small, wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside a textbook. Gray's Anatomy 3rd edition. Old dog-eared pages annotated in pencil. And a note translated by Tommy's careful hand. For someone who wants to learn. You will make a fine doctor someday. J.B. Keiko held the book like it was made of gold and glass, precious and fragile and impossibly valuable, because in a way it was all three. This was not just a textbook. This was trust. This was Jackson Bennett, who had lost his brother to Japan, giving a Japanese prisoner the tools to save lives. The contradiction should have been impossible, but she held it in her hands anyway. That night, the compound was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that precedes storms. Keiko could not sleep. The textbook sat beside her cot, its presence both comfort and accusation. She ran her fingers over the cover, feeling the wear from years of use. Somewhere in the darkness, Sachiko made a sound. Not quite a moan, not quite a geppo, something in between. You okay, Keiko whispered. Silence. Then quietly, Sachiko's voice. My leg. The old wound. It feels wrong. Show me. It is fine. Just sore. Sachiko, show me. A pause. Then movement. Sachiko pulled back her blanket. Even in darkness, Keiko could see the problem. Swelling, heat radiating from flesh. The particular smell of infection, sweet and rotten. How long, Keiko demanded? A week. Maybe more. And you said nothing. What would I say? Let the enemy cut it off. Let them operate. You know what they did to our soldiers. Amputations without anesthesia. Screams that lasted hours. That is not what they do here, Keiko said urgently. I have seen their surgeries. They use anesthesia, proper technique, sterile instruments. You cannot know that. I do know it. I have watched. Because you collaborate, Sachiko said bitterly. Like Tanaka said. Because I pay attention. Because I want to survive. Because holding on to hate when mercy is offered is just another way of dying. Sachiko turned her face away. I am not ready to accept their kindness, not after everything. Then you will die, Keiko said flatly. That infection will spread. Turn septic. Kill you in days, maybe less. Good. Better to die with honor than live as a traitor. Keiko grabbed her arm, harder than she meant to. Urgent. Dying proves nothing except that you are dead. Living proves you are strong enough to change. To learn. To let go of certainty when certainty becomes poison. Let me die, Sachiko whispered. No. Keiko stood, walked to the door, called for the guard. Within minutes, the barn exploded with light and motion. Jackson, Hayes, Tommy, all moving with the coordinated urgency of medical professionals who understood that minutes mattered. They lifted Sachiko onto a stretcher. She fought weakly, delirious with fever. No, she moaned in Japanese. Let me die. Do not let them cut. But they did not cut, not yet. First came examination, assessment, the careful evaluation that preceded treatment, and Keiko watched, along with the other women who had crept from the barracks drawn by Sachiko's cries. They watched the Americans work, watched them move with precision and care, watched them treat Sachiko Yamamoto, the woman who had mocked them most viciously, with the same gentle competence they showed everyone. The laughter, when it finally died, took something else with it. The certainty that the enemy was exactly what they had been told. Because here in a barn in Texas at 3 in the morning, American cowboys with stethoscopes were fighting to save a life that hated them. And they were doing it without hesitation, without condition, without asking for gratitude or apology or change. They were doing it because that was what healers did. And watching them work, Keiko finally understood what Jackson had tried to tell her. Medicine has no enemies, only patience. Before we continue with what happened in that operating room, I need to pause here for a moment. If you are finding this story powerful, if it is making you think about mercy and forgiveness and what it means to treat enemies with dignity, please take a second to like this video and leave a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me if you or your family had experiences with prisoners of war during World War II. These stories matter. They are part of our history as Americans. The choice our country made to treat enemy prisoners with humanity, even when our enemies did not extend the same courtesy to American POWs, that choice defined who we were, who we still are at our best. And if you know someone who would appreciate this story, a fellow veteran, a history enthusiast, someone who believes in the power of mercy over revenge, please share this video with them. Now back to Texas, December 1944. Where a Japanese woman who had mocked American doctors was about to discover that cowboys knew more about medicine than propaganda had ever admitted. The barn transformed into a theater of light and purpose. Generator roared to life outside. Surgical lamp flooded the table with illumination so bright it turned shadows into memory. Jackson scrubbed his hands at the basin, methodical, thorough, counting seconds under his breath, the way surgical protocol demanded. No. Hayes laid out instruments with the precision of a jeweler arranging diamonds. Each tool in its designated position, each blade at the correct angle. The choreography of preparation that preceded every surgery performed so many times it had become ritual. Tommy prepped anesthesia, measured dosage based on Sachiko's weight and condition, double-checked concentrations. Nothing left to chance. Keiko stood in the doorway with 3 other women. Forbidden to enter the sterile field but unable to leave. Drawn by the same morbid fascination that makes people watch disasters unfold, unable to look away, even when looking hurts. Sachiko lay on the table, sedated but not yet fully under. Her eyes rolled unfocused. She murmured in Japanese words slurred by drugs and fever. Let me die with honor. Do not let the barbarians cut me. Jackson bent close, his voice gentle, even though she could not understand the words. We are going to fix this. You are going to be okay. I promise. Tommy translated. Sachiko's eyes focused briefly on Jackson's face. Something flickered there. Fear, maybe. Or the beginning of trust. Then the anesthesia pulled her under, and she went limp. Jackson irrigated the wound. Saline hissed against torn muscle, washing away pus and dead tissue. The smell was overwhelming. Sweet rot, infection that had spread deeper than skin into muscle approaching bone. In Nagoya, Keiko thought this would be amputation. No choice, no discussion. Remove the leg above the infection and hope the patient survived the shock. But Jackson was not amputating. He was excavating, cutting away dead tissue with movements so precise they looked choreographed. Each stroke of the scalpel, deliberate. Each motion, economical. Gauze soaked red, discarded into a basin. Replaced. The rhythm constant. Cut, irrigate, swab, assess. Cut, irrigate, swab, assess. How long has this been infected? Hayes asked, his voice tight. Week, maybe longer, Jackson replied. She hit it well. Stoic or stupid, terrified. They were told we amputate without anesthesia. That we butcher prisoners. Jesus, yeah. The shrapnel came next, embedded deep, surrounded by scar tissue from the original wound. Japanese doctors had left it there, either unable or unwilling to extract it, and it had been festering ever since, a time bomb of infection waiting to detonate. Jackson used curved forceps, worked slowly, feeling for the metal through inflamed tissue, found it, began the delicate process of extraction. The first piece came free, jagged, blackened, deadly. He dropped it into a steel basin. The clink echoed in the silent barn. Then another piece, smaller, just as deadly. Clink, and another. Clink, clink, clink. How the hell was she walking on this? Hayes muttered. Keiko knew the answer. She had seen it in Nagoya. Soldiers who marched on broken feet because orders demanded it. Nurses who worked 20-hour shifts because patients needed them. The human capacity to endure pain when survival or duty or sheer stubbornness demanded it. Sachiko had walked on an infected shrapnel-filled leg because admitting weakness meant vulnerability. And vulnerability, they had all learned, was dangerous. But here vulnerability was being met with competence, with care, with the steady hands of men who had chosen mercy over revenge. Jackson finished the extraction. 7 pieces of shrapnel total, ranging from the size of a fingernail to the size of a bullet. He laid them out on gauze, a grim inventory of Japanese military ordnance that had nearly killed one of Japan's own. Now came debridement, the careful removal of dead tissue. Jackson worked with the focus of a sculptor, removing everything that could not heal, preserving everything that could. Keiko watched his hands, rough from ranch work, calloused from roping cattle and fixing fences, and all the labor that came with running a spread in West Texas. But here in this moment, they moved with the delicacy of a pianist. Antiseptic came next, the sharp smell of iodine cutting through the sweetness of infection. Then sutures. Jackson stitched with small, precise movements. Each stitch pulled tissue together without tension, each knot tied with exactly the right tightness. The women watching from the doorway had gone silent. No whispers, no commentary, just observation. "They are better than our surgeons," someone finally said. Her voice was small, awed. No one argued, because it was true, undeniably, uncomfortably true. This was not backwards medicine, not primitive butchery. This was surgery performed with skill that would have been impressive in any hospital in the world. In Tokyo, in London, anywhere. And it was happening in a converted barn in Texas, performed by a cowboy who smelled like horses and wore spurs to medical rounds. Jackson finished the final stitch, bandaged the wound with clean gauze, checked Sachiko's pulse, her breathing, her color. "She is stable," he said quietly. The barn exhaled. Sachiko woke 36 hours later, groggy, confused, alive. Her first words, slurred by lingering anesthesia, were in Japanese. "My leg. Did they take my leg?" Keiko sat beside the cot. She reached out, then hesitated. Physical comfort was not something they did. Too many months of hardship had made them all prickly and defensive and afraid of softness. But she touched Sachiko's hand anyway. No amputation. They removed the shrapnel, cleaned the infection. "You still have your leg." Sachiko's eyes filled with tears. I was so sure they would cut, that I would wake up and it would be gone." "I know. But you were wrong. They saved it, even though I called them farm boys, even though I mocked them, yes." Why? Keiko had no answer, or rather she had an answer, but it felt too large to speak. Because that is what healers do. Because mercy does not require the recipient to deserve it. Because Jackson Bennett had lost his brother to Japan and chose to heal Japanese women anyway. "Because they are better than we thought," Keiko said finally. "Better than we were told." Jackson appeared beside the cot. His exhaustion was visible in the circles under his eyes, the heaviness of his movements. He had been up all night. First with Sachiko's surgery, then monitoring her recovery, checking vital signs every hour to ensure infection did not return. He said something in English. Tommy translated. "How do you feel?" Sachiko stared at him. This man who had saved her leg, who had worked through the night to preserve a limb that belonged to someone who had insulted him, mocked him, called him unqualified. "Why?" she whispered. Tommy translated. Jackson sat on the stool beside her cot, rubbed his face with both hands. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, tired but certain. "Because that is what doctors do. We save lives." It does not matter whose, but your brother, Baton. Sachiko knew. Someone had told her, or she had overheard. Either way, she knew that Jackson had every reason to let her die. Jackson's jaw tightened. For a moment, Keiko thought he would not answer. Then he sighed. Yeah, my brother Robert died at Baton, beaten by Japanese guards, starved, worked until his body gave out. Pause. And I wanted to hate you for it. All of you, every Japanese soldier, every Japanese civilian, everyone who wore that uniform or spoke that language or believed in that empire. He looked at Sachiko directly. But Robert would not want me to hate. He would want me to heal. So that is what I do. I heal. Because the alternative is to become the thing I hate. And I will not do that. I will not dishonor his memory that way. Tommy translated slowly, carefully, making sure every word carried its full weight. Sachiko's tears fell freely now. Not from pain, from something else. Something that felt like the shattering of certainty, the collapse of a worldview, the terrible freedom that comes when everything you thought you knew turns out to be wrong. I am sorry, she whispered, for your brother, for my words, for everything. You do not need to apologize. You were scared. Propaganda told you we were monsters. I would probably believe the same if our positions were reversed. How do you forgive? I do not know if I have forgiven. But I have chosen not to hate. That is not the same thing. But it is what I can do. The conversation ended there. Jackson stood, checked Sachiko's bandages one more time, and left to see other patients. But something had shifted. In Sachiko, in the other women who had witnessed the surgery, in the air itself, which felt different now, lighter, as if a weight they had been carrying had finally been set down. 3 days later, Keiko was helping Tommy organize supplies. The work had become routine now, comfortable. She knew where everything belonged, knew the names of instruments in English, knew the rhythms of the infirmary better than she knew the barracks. Tommy was explaining the difference between two types of bandages. His Japanese had improved, though it was still clumsy and endearing in its earnestness. This one for big wound, he said, holding up a larger roll. This one for small. Very important, use correct size. Keiko nodded. Hi, I understand. He beamed at her, proud that his explanation had succeeded. The word slipped out before Keiko could stop it. Sensei. Teacher. Tommy froze, stared at her. Keiko's face went hot. She had not meant to say it. The word had emerged from someplace deeper than conscious thought, a place that recognized what was happening here in this barn between enemy and enemy, who were becoming something else. Teacher and student. Tommy's eyes went wide, then soft. No, he stammered in Japanese. I am not sensei, just corpsman, learning like you. But Keiko shook her head. The word had been spoken, and now that it was out, she could not take it back. Did not want to take it back, sensei, she repeated. Firmly this time. You teach me, that makes you sensei. The word spread like fire through dry grass. By evening, other women were using it, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Hey sensei, can you show me how to wrap ankle properly? Jackson sensei, what medicine is this? Rodriguez sensei, how to say thermometer in English. At first, the Americans looked confused, then touched. They did not fully understand the weight of the word, the reverence it carried in Japanese culture. Sensei was not just teacher, it was master, guide, someone worthy of respect and emulation. To call an enemy sensei was to admit they had something worth learning, something worth preserving, something worth carrying home when the war ended. Sergeant Tanaka heard the word and her face went stiff with fury, but she said nothing. Because even she had accepted aspirin from Dr. Hayes when her arthritis flared. Even she had watched the surgery that saved Sachiko's leg. Even she, rigid with certainty and loyalty, could not deny what her eyes had witnessed. The enemy knew things Japan needed to learn, and denying that truth served no one. Evening, the barn quiet. Keiko was alone reading the Gray's Anatomy textbook by lamplight. She had been studying it every night, tracing the diagrams with a finger, memorizing Latin names for bones and muscles. She turned to page 212 and something fell out. An envelope, unsealed, yellowed with age. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, masculine, addressed to Jackson Bennett. She should not read it. This was private, this was not hers. But her eyes had already found the first line, little brother. The letter was from Robert, dated March 1942, written just before he shipped to the Philippines, before Bataan. Before everything, Keiko's Japanese was good, but her English was still rough. She struggled through the words, piecing together meaning. Little brother, if you are reading this, I am probably gone. Bataan is not looking good. Do not be angry. Do not hate. I have seen enough hate out here to last 1,000 lifetimes. Take this textbook, finish school, open that clinic we talked about. Heal people. All people. Even if they are the enemy. Because that is what real doctors do. Love you, Bobby. The letter blurred. Keiko wiped her eyes, read it again and again. Jackson had not just given her a textbook. He had given her his brother's dying wish. The last words Robert Bennett had written before Japanese soldiers killed him. Heal people. All people. Even if they are the enemy. Robert had known. Somehow in that jungle prison camp, watching his body fail and his friends die, he had known that hate would solve nothing. That the only victory over war was to refuse to let it make you cruel. And Jackson had kept that promise. Had honored his brother by healing the people whose countrymen had killed him. Keiko sat with the letter for a long time. The lamp burned low. Outside, the Texas night grew cold. But she did not move. Finally, she stood, walked to Jackson's office. He was still there writing reports, always writing reports. Sensei Bennett, she said. He looked up, surprised to see her so late. I found this, in book. She held up the letter, her English failing her in the emotion of the moment. Your brother, his words. I read, I am sorry, I should not. Jackson's face went still. He had forgotten the letter was there, had tucked it into the book years ago, and carried it through medical school, through the war, through everything. It is okay, he said quietly. Keiko's voice cracked. He tell you to heal. Even enemy, even us. Yeah, that is why you give me book. Not just medical knowledge. You give me Robert's heart, his belief. Jackson nodded, unable to speak. Keiko bowed deeply, pressing her hands together, tears streaming down her face. I will honor this, she said. Every life I save, I honor Robert Bennett. Every person I teach because he believed medicine that is bigger than war. I promise. I promise this. Jackson stood, crossed the room. For a moment, he seemed about to say something. Then instead, he placed his hand briefly on her shoulder. The gesture of a teacher to a student. Of one healer to another. Make me proud, Keiko. I will. Weeks passed, routine deepened. The infirmary became a classroom where enemy taught, enemy the things that transcended enmity. Jackson showed Keiko how to suture. She practiced on oranges first, then leather, then under supervision on actual patients. Her stitches grew neater with each attempt. By week 5, her sutures were as precise as his. Hayes taught her to read X-rays. She learned to spot fractures, identify pneumonia, distinguish between normal shadows and pathology. She had a gift for it, he said, an eye for detail that came from years of observation. Tommy explained pharmacology, drug interactions, proper dosages, the difference between antibiotics that saved lives and incorrect doses that caused harm. He wrote everything down in a notebook for her. English on one side, Japanese translations on the other. Other women joined, not all. Tanaka and her loyalists kept their distance, maintained their rigid disapproval. But enough women came that the infirmary felt crowded with students eager to learn. Sachiko, once she recovered, became the most dedicated. She studied wound care with the intensity of someone trying to atone. Every bandage she wrapped was perfect. Every dressing she changed was done with textbook precision. One Sunday afternoon, the guards organized a baseball game. Come on, one of them called to the prisoners. We need more players. The women looked at each other, uncertain. Was this a trick? A test? It is just a game, Tommy translated. For fun, no pressure. Sachiko surprised everyone by stepping forward. Then 2 others. Then Keiko. The game was chaos. None of the Japanese women understood the rules. They swung at every pitch, ran to the wrong bases, collided with each other in the outfield. But the Americans did not mock them. They demonstrated, explained, cheered when someone finally connected with the ball. Sachiko's first hit sailed toward the outfield. The American player shouted, "Run, run to first." She ran, wrong direction at first. They redirected her, laughing but kind. She made it to first base, breathing hard, confused, but smiling. Guard Carter, who had been so hostile at the beginning, was playing first base. He handed her the ball. "Good hit," he said. Sachiko stared at him, this man who had glared at her for weeks, who had muttered under his breath about Japs and traitors. Now he was smiling, actually smiling. "Thank you," she said in English, her first English words. Carter's smile widened. "You are welcome." After the game, the ranch cook brought out refreshments. Lemonade, and something the women had never seen. "Ice cream," Tommy explained. "American dessert, very good." The cook had made vanilla ice cream churned by hand that morning. He served it in small bowls with spoons. Keiko took a bite. The cold shocked her, then the sweetness, creamy, rich, unlike anything she had tasted, like frozen milk sweetened with sugar and dreams. "This," she said, eyes closing, "is magic." Jackson laughed. "Wait until you try apple pie with ice cream." The women sat in the grass eating ice cream, watching the sun set over Texas. Enemy and enemy becoming something else, becoming people who shared lemonade and laughter and the particular joy of a game played in the dust. Carter sat near Keiko. He had been watching her for weeks, watching all of them, seeing things he had not expected to see. "I was wrong about you," he said suddenly, his voice rough. I thought you were all the same, like the ones who killed my uncle at Pearl Harbor." Pause. "But you are not. You are just people, caught in the same damn war as the rest of us." Keiko looked at him, saw the shame in his eyes, the struggle to admit error. "We were wrong too," she said, "about Americans, about many things." Carter nodded, held out his hand. Keiko took it. They shook enemy and enemy, choosing something different. That night, Keiko wrote in a journal she had started keeping. Tommy had given her the notebook, encouraged her to practice English by writing. "Today I played baseball," she wrote. "Today I ate ice cream. Today I shook hands with a man who hated me. And none of it felt like betrayal. It felt like being human again." March 1945. Spring coming to Texas. Wildflowers beginning to bloom across the prairie. And news from the war. Germany on the verge of collapse. Japan being pushed back across the Pacific. The end in sight, though how far away remained uncertain. The announcement came during morning roll call. Repatriation planning has begun. All prisoners will eventually be returned to Japan. Timeline uncertain, but preparations starting now. The women received the news in silence. They should have been overjoyed. Home, family, Japan. Instead, the emotion was complicated. Relief mixed with dread. Anticipation laced with fear. Because going home meant facing questions, investigations, Sergeant Tanaka's promised reckoning for those who collaborated. And going home meant leaving the people who had saved their lives. Jackson helped each woman prepare a medical kit to take back to Japan. Bandages, antiseptic, sulfa powder, aspirin, basic supplies that were abundant here but would be precious in devastated Japan. "For your families," he said through Tommy, "for whoever needs it." Keiko assembled her kit with care, each item chosen deliberately. Each one a tool for healing a bridge between the medicines she had learned here and the work she would do at home. "Sensei Bennett," she said one afternoon, "the book, Gray Anatomy, I should return, your brother's book, so precious. No, it is yours now, but your memory of him. Bobby would want you to have it, I am sure of that. This book should be used to save lives. You will do that." "I know you will." He also gave her a stethoscope, used but functional. The rubber tubing cracked in places but still serviceable. And a letter of recommendation, in English typed on official letterhead. "If you ever need reference for medical school, give them this." Keiko could not speak, could only bow deeply, pressing her hands together, the formal gesture of profound gratitude. "Sensei, hontoni arigato gozaimasu." Thank you truly. Jackson looked uncomfortable with the formality. Cowboys did not know how to receive bows, but he nodded. "You are welcome. Now go save some lives." April 1945. The truck came at dawn. 15 women lined up, bags packed, medical kits in hand, the tools of healing weighing more than the clothes on their backs. Jackson and his team stood at attention. No speeches, no ceremonies, just quiet acknowledgement. Sachiko shook Jackson's hand. A month ago, she would not have touched him. Now she gripped his hand firmly. Thank you for my leg, cowboy sensei. Jackson grinned. Thank you for not dying on me. Would have been a lot of paperwork. Laughter through tears. Tommy hugged several women. Inappropriate perhaps, but genuine. No one objected. Even Carter was there. He handed Keiko a pack of gum. Wrigley's, he said. Best in America. Carter-san, thank you. For everything. For changing. He looked away. Yeah, well, do not get killed over there. Hayes gave a stiff salute. The women bowed back. Mutual respect crossing the chasm of language and culture. Keiko was last in line. She stood before Jackson, clutching the Gray's Anatomy textbook like a talisman. I will use this well, she said. I will honor Robert. I will save lives. I know. I will tell people. About here, about you, about cowboys who taught us mercy is not weakness. Take care of yourself, Keiko. You also, Jackson sensei. She bowed. He removed his Stetson, placed it briefly on her head the way a father might crown a daughter. For luck. Then took it back. She smiled through tears. The truck pulled away. Dust rose. The women waved until the figures of the Americans became specks, then vanished. Inside the truck, silence. Then Sachiko spoke. We will never see them again. Keiko looked down at the textbook in her lap, at the stethoscope around her neck, at the medical kit between her feet. No, she said quietly. We will see them every time we treat a patient. Every time we save a life, they will be there. The ship home took weeks. Gray sea, gray sky, the smell of salt and diesel, and too many people in too small a space. Keiko stood at the rail watching waves. The textbook was hidden in her bag, wrapped in cloth to protect it from moisture. She had read it 4 times already, would read it 4 times more before landing. Other women talked quietly of what awaited them. Families, homes, Japan, if there were any homes left. The firebombing had been devastating. Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya, cities turned to ash. The Japan they remembered might not exist anymore, and they would face questions, investigations. Tanaka had made good on her promise to file reports, detailed accounts of who had cooperated, who had volunteered, who had called the enemy sensei. Keiko should have been afraid. Instead, she felt something else. Clarity. Let them investigate. Let them question. She would tell the truth. That American cowboys had saved her life with medicine Japan could not provide. That the enemy had treated her with more dignity than her own country's hospitals had managed. That she had learned, and she would use that knowledge to help her people. If that was collaboration, so be it. She would collaborate with healing, with mercy, with the radical notion that saving lives mattered more than preserving pride. Tokyo, when they arrived, was ruins and dust, the smell of old fires, buildings reduced to frames, people thin and hollow-eyed. The investigations came quickly. All 15 women questioned separately. Tanaka testified first. These women collaborated, learned from the enemy, called them teachers, betrayed Japan. When pressed for details, she admitted, no intelligence given, no sabotage, just learning, just medicine. Keiko's turn. Why did you volunteer in the infirmary? Because I am a nurse. The sick needed care. You learned American techniques, I learned medicine. Medicine has no nationality. You called them sensei. They were teachers. That made them sensei, even though they are the enemy, even though the interrogator, an older man with tired eyes, set down his pen. What did you learn? Everything Keiko said. How to prevent infection, how to suture properly, how to read x-rays, how to save lives when you have resources instead of just desperation. Pause. I learned that we were lied to. About American medicine, about American cruelty, about what prisoners could expect. That is a serious accusation. It is the truth. 2 weeks later, the verdict. No charges. Released. Because Japan in ruins needed every skilled person it had. And Keiko Nakamura was now the most skilled nurse in her district. 5 years after the war, 1950, Keiko's clinic in Shibuya, Tokyo. Small. 1 room. American Red Cross donated equipment because irony had a sense of humor. On the shelf, Gray's Anatomy 3rd edition, worn now from use. Annotated in Japanese in Keiko's careful hand. Beside it, a photograph, Jackson Bennett in his cowboy hat standing outside the Texas barn. Tommy had taken it secretly, sent it to her through the Red Cross years later. A reminder. The little boy arrived with an orphanage worker, 7 years old, parents killed in the fire bombings, feverish, weak, afraid. High fever 3 days, the worker explained. He will not eat, will not speak. I think he wants to die. Keiko knelt beside him, eye level, the way Jackson had taught her. Hello, she said softly. My name is Keiko. I'm a doctor. The boy flinched. She saw it. The fear, the expectation of pain. She had felt it once in a barn in Texas, waiting for an IV insertion that never hurt. I need to give you medicine, she explained. A needle. It will help you get better. The boy shook his head violently, tears on his cheeks. I was afraid of needles once too, Keiko said. In a place very far away. But a kind doctor showed me that needles can heal, not just hurt. Did it hurt? Barely. He was very gentle. She prepared the injection. Let him watch each step. Explained in simple language what she was doing and why. Then using Jackson's technique, steady hands, in soft voice and pressure, so gentle it barely registered, she administered the shot. The boy's eyes went wide. That is it, she smoothed his hair. The gesture automatic, learned from watching American nurses care for frightened patients. You are safe now, she said. The words Jackson had spoken to her. The same promise, different language, same meaning. The boy collapsed into her arms, sobbing, finally releasing the terror he had carried since the bombs fell, and his parents died and his world became nothing but fear and loss. She held him, let him cry, because healing was not just medicine. It was witnessing suffering and saying you matter. You are worth saving. You are safe. Over the next weeks, the boy recovered, gained weight, started smiling. And when he left for a foster home, he bowed to Keiko. Sensei, he said, the words she had first spoken to Tommy Rodriguez in a Texas barn. Now it came full circle. 1955, 10 years after the war, a letter arrived at Keiko's clinic from Sergeant Hana Tanaka. Keiko stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Nakamura, I was wrong. I fought this admission for 10 years. Told myself you were a traitor. That cooperation with the enemy was weakness. That Japanese medicine was superior despite lacking resources. Then I worked in a military hospital using American techniques you brought back. Sterilization protocols, proper wound care, antibiotics used correctly. I saw the difference. Fewer infections, fewer deaths. Soldiers going home to their families instead of dying from preventable complications. You were right. Medicine has no nationality, and I was a fool to think otherwise. I do not ask forgiveness, but I acknowledge my error. Tanaka. Keiko read the letter 3 times, then she wrote back. Tanaka-san, you were not wrong to be loyal. You were not wrong to question. You were a soldier doing what soldiers must do. But you are brave to admit when beliefs change. That takes more courage than maintaining certainty. If you ever need medical advice, I am here. Respectfully, Nakamura. The exchange marks something important. Not reconciliation exactly, but the acknowledgement that people could change, that rigid certainty could soften, that even enemies could find common ground in the pursuit of healing. Keiko ran her clinic for 37 years. She trained over 200 nurses in American medical techniques, sterilization protocols, proper suturing, how to prevent infection, how to treat patients like they deserve dignity regardless of their status or ability to pay. Her students called her sensei. The word Jackson's team had never fully understood in Texas now spread through Tokyo's medical community. Nakamura sensei, the nurse who learned from cowboys. She saved thousands of lives, and she never forgot. In 1985, she wrote in her journal the entry that would become her legacy. People ask me why I use American medical techniques, why I keep that textbook on my shelf, why I tell these stories. I tell them I was taught by the best doctors I ever met, and they happen to be the enemy. War teaches hate, but peace requires more. It requires forgiveness, understanding, the courage to learn from those who hurt us. Dr. Jackson Bennett gave me more than medicine. He gave me proof that humanity survives even in conflict. That mercy is stronger than revenge. That healing has no nationality. I carry that lesson every day. In every patient I treat, In every nurse I train, the war took my country, my innocence, my certainty, but it gave me something unexpected. Teachers who wore cowboy hats and spoke with Texas drawls, who showed me the enemy was never the American people. It was war itself. And the best way to fight war, heal its wounds. 1909, Keiko was 70 years old, retired. Her granddaughter was now running the clinic. A letter arrived from America. Jackson Bennett had passed away, age 79. His son wrote, "Dad spoke of you often, said you were one of his best students, said you proved teaching has no borders. He wanted you to have this." Inside the envelope, Jackson's cowboy hat, the one he had placed on her head that last day in Texas, and a note in his handwriting dated 1994. Keiko, if you are reading this, I am gone. But the work continues. You prove that. Every life you saved, you honored Bobby. You honored healing. Keep teaching. Keep saving lives. Keep proving that mercy matters. Your friend always, Jack. Keiko placed the hat on her desk, beside the textbook, beside the photograph of a barn in Texas that had changed her life. Then she called her granddaughter. "Come here, I want to tell you a story about the war, about enemies who became teachers, about cowboys who understood mercy better than generals ever did." And as she spoke, the story passed to another generation. The lesson preserved, the truth carried forward, that healing has no enemies, only patience. And mercy once learned becomes impossible to forget. Thank you for staying with this story to the end. Keiko Nakamura was real. Dr. Jackson Bennett was real. The Texas POW camps were real. And the transformation that happened there was real too. Over 400,000 Axis prisoners were held in camps across America during World War II. The survival rate was over 98%. Compare that to the 27% survival rate for Allied POWs in Japanese camps. This difference was not accidental. It was policy. The Geneva Convention, applied fully, even to enemies who did not extend the same courtesy to American prisoners. Thousands of former Axis POWs returned home transformed, not by force, not by propaganda, but by experiencing a country that chose mercy over revenge, that fed enemies better than many countries fed their own soldiers, that treated prisoners like human beings who deserve dignity. If this story moved you, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about what this means to you in 2025, when divisions seem wider than ever and mercy feels like weakness instead of strength. These stories matter because they remind us who we can be at our best. They show us that yesterday's enemies can become tomorrow's friends if we have the courage to choose healing over hatred. The greatest generation understood this. They lived it, and we owe it to them to remember. What lessons from their example do we need most today? Tell us in the comments. Until next time, remember, history is not just about what happened. It is about what we learned and what we choose to carry forward.